All right, guys, so looking at chapter 3.6, what we're going to be talking about in this section is translations, moving this graph up, down, left, or right, reflections, and vertical stretch or shrink. Now, when we look at this here, don't really worry too much about what this graph looks like because these look the exact same. Now, what we really want to focus on is this here. And this part here. F of x minus h inside the parentheses. If it's inside the parentheses, what we're talking about is a horizontal translation. So we have x minus h, or x plus h, inside the parentheses. We're talking about a horizontal translation. And when it's outside the parentheses, we're talking about a vertical translation. So we could have something like f of x minus 4 and f of x plus 4. Now, when we talk about horizontal, we're moving to the left or right. It's either going left or right. When we talk about horizontal, we're talking about either to the left or to the right. And now the sign of the number is going to be a little misleading. Because if we have f of x minus 4, when we have minus 4, it's going to seem like it's going to the left because we're talking about negative 4. But it's actually moving to the right. So if a number inside parentheses, whenever we have a number inside parentheses, it's the opposite of what you think. So if the number inside parentheses is negative, it's moving to the right. Which means if it's positive, it's moving to the left. And that's only inside of the parentheses. So we have x minus 4, it's moving 4 units to the right. So horizontal translation of 4 units to the right. If it's f of x plus 4, it's moving 4 units to the left. So horizontal translation is a little bit opposite of what we think. Now, vertical translation, we're talking about f of x plus k. This time we have a value on the outside. And when we talk about vertical translation, we're talking about up or down. So for this here, we could have f of x, let's just stick with 4 plus 4, or f of x minus 4. Now, with vertical translations, it's exactly what we think. If we have plus 4, it's moving up 4. If it's minus 4, it's moving down 4. And really what we're talking about with all this here is just moving the graph. So it's inside parentheses, it's moving the whole graph to the right or to the left, that amount. Vertical translation, it's moving the whole graph up, that amount, or down. Any questions on any of this here so far? Any questions on any of this here so far? Okay. So let's look at this here. Let f of x be 2x minus 1. So let's graph this first, 2x minus 1. So I'm just going to rewrite it so we have it written down. F of x equals 2x minus 1. Well, there's two key parts. There's the slope and the y-intercept. Well, the slope for this is what? What is the slope for this function? 2. Or we could say 2 over run because it's rise over run. Because when they don't give us a fraction, they just give us a whole number for the slope, the run is always 1. The run is, so the run will always be 1. Now, what's the y-intercept? -1. It crosses the y-axis at -1. Our slope is 2 or 2 over 1. And our y-intercept is negative 1. So if I want to graph this, I'm going to go to the y-intercept of negative 1. So it's down 1 on the y. And we'd make a point. So if we were graphing this, we'd go down 1 on the y-axis and make a point for our y-intercept. Now our slope is 2 or 2 over 1. Now is the slope positive or negative? Positive. It's a positive value of 2, yes? So that means the slope, the overall line, should be going what? Up. So as we go from left to right, as we go this way across the graph, the line should be increasing. It should be going up. So from this point here, we would go up 2 and over 1. Our rise is 2. So we rise 2 and go 1 to the right. And we could do it again. I can go from this point here, go up 2 and over 1. And we can do this multiple times, up 2 over 1. And at this point here, we would draw our line. So this here would be our original graph. Okay. Any questions on how we graph this? Because I just want to go again over graphing because I think some of y'all struggled with graphing, especially on the last test. So I just wanted to go over this here. Now, let's look at the transformation. We're talking about f of x plus 3. So vertical or horizontal, which one added a value to the outside? So which one, vertical or horizontal, which one added a value to the outside? That would be what? Which one of these added a value to the outside? Vertical, because it's f of x plus k. Now if k is positive, it is going up. If k is negative, it is going down, whatever that amount is. So for us here, this is a vertical translation. How far? What's our value? What would the value be? What is the value of k for this here? What would the value of k be? So what would the value of k be for this here? So what would our value be? What would the value of k be for this here? What does k match up to for this here? So that there, f of x plus k, what does the k value match up to this here? It's 3. Because how much is it changing? It's moving it 3 units. It's plus 3. We added 3 to it. Because this matches up with our f of x plus k. F of x matches up with f of x. The k matches up with the plus 3. Now, is this value positive or negative? Positive. So if it's positive, is it moving up or down? Is it going to move up or down? Up. So this here, our transformation from our original graph would be a vertical translation because we're adding 3 to the outside. And it's moving at 3 units up. And that's it. Now, if we wanted to graph it, it would just be every single point on this graph would move 3 units up. So 1, 2, 3. Here would go up 1, 2, 3. This point here would be up 1, 2, 3. It would be the same line, but we would move it up 3. And again, so the main thing to focus on, especially on the homework, is describing how is it moving. Well, this here is a vertical translation because it's added to the outside. And since it's 3 and positive, it would be up 3 or 3 units up. Questions on this here? So let's look at this one here. So let's graph it first, then we'll talk about the translation. F of x equals 2x minus 1. What is the slope for this here? 2. Or we can say 2 over 1. The slope is always going to be in front of the x value when we have it in slope-intercept form, when it comes in the form of y equals mx plus b. M is the slope, b is the y-intercept. So our slope is 2 over 1. It's our rise over run. Now, what is the y-intercept? Where does it cross the y-axis? At -1, because our b is that -1. That -1 matches up with the value of b. So at the y-intercept, we would go down to -1. And our slope would be 2. So this is the same line. We would go up 2 over 1. And we get our line because our slope tells us it's 2 over 1. So we rise 2 and over 1 because it's positive. We go up 2 and 1 to the right. Now our transformation. We're talking about f of x plus 3. Now, would this be a horizontal translation or a vertical translation? Horizontal. Because the number is inside the parentheses. If the number is inside the parentheses, it is horizontal. Now, if h is positive, if the h value, so the number inside the parentheses is positive, it's moving to the left. If the number inside is negative, it's moving to the right. Now, what is our number inside, or what is our value of h? 3, and it's moving which direction? Left. So for this here, f of x plus 3 would be a horizontal translation of 3 units to the left. And that's it. That's all it's asking for. Especially for the homework, it's not going to ask you to graph it. It's just asking you to describe the transformation. So for the first one, we would have it move 3 units up. Here, we're moving it 3 units to the left. So each point, I would move 3 units to the left. So at this point here, I would move 1, 2, 3. Here I move 1, 2, 3. Here I move 1, 2. Here I move 1, 2, 3. and we get this here. Questions on this here? So let's look at this one here. We won't focus so much on graphing. We're just going to focus on the translation, seeing how it moves. So our translation for this here is f of x minus 3. F of x minus 3. Would this be a horizontal or vertical translation? Vertical. And we know it's vertical because we're subtracting something from the, or adding something to the outside. So this would be a vertical translation of what? So we would say 3, but the negative tells me the direction. It would be moving where? Down. 3 units down. That's a vertical translation of 3 units down, or down 3. It's moving down 3. Vertical translation, 3 down. So it's meaning that we're taking every point on the original graph and moving it down 3 units. And that's it. Questions on this here? Questions on any of this so far? Let's look at this next one here. Nope. Actually, none of the assignments require graphing. It's just describing the transformation. So let's look at this one here. How would we describe this transformation of f of x minus 3? It would be horizontal because it's inside the parentheses. It's a horizontal transformation. Of what? Well, 3 units. Right. 3 units to the right. Because again, whenever we have it inside the parentheses, it's opposite of what we think. If it's negative, it's to the right. If it's positive, it's to the left. Any questions on this here? Are we good with this here? Now the next type we have is reflections. Negative f of x is going to be a reflection across the x-axis. Negative f of x is a reflection across the x-axis. And f of negative x, when the negative is inside, it's across the y-axis. And that's the main thing to see with this here. So if we're talking about the transformation, I'd almost circle this or highlight this somewhere. If it's across the x-axis, it's negative f of x. If we talk about a transformation of negative f of x, we're reflecting it across the x. If it's f of negative x, if we have negative x inside, then it's a reflection across the y. Outside, negative f of x is across the x. F of negative x is across the y. Outside is across the x. Inside is across the y. Questions on this here? Dash. or axis, axis. So if it's outside the parentheses, it's across the x. If it's inside the parentheses, it's across the y. So the first one, we have 2. We're going to do 2 with this one here because A and B. Now the first one's talking about the transformation, negative f of x. Because it's a negative, we're talking about a what? Reflection. We're talking about a reflection. Now it's talking about the negative. Is it outside or inside? Outside. So it's going to be a reflection across what? X-axis. So this here would be a reflection across the x-axis because it's outside the parentheses. Because we have negative f of x. Whenever we have negative f of x, it's a reflection across the x. Negative f of x would be a reflection across the x. Questions on this here? Well, the other one is f of negative x. So this time the negative is it still, it's inside, isn't it? So again, this is still a reflection. But this time it's going to be across what? The y-axis. Because since it's inside the parentheses, it will be across the y-axis. Outside the parentheses, it will be across the x-axis. Inside the parentheses, it's across the y. Questions on this here? So this here, we have negative f of x. So this here would be a reflection across the x-axis. It would be a reflection across the x-axis. And that's it. That's all we have to do for this one here. Questions on this here? So I have f of negative x. What would this be? A reflection across the y-axis because it's inside the parentheses, so it would be a reflection across the y-axis. Questions on this here? Any questions on any of this here so far? Okay. So we're going to describe these transformations. And the first one we're going to do is the f of x minus 2. So how would I describe that transformation? So it's going to be one of these 4. So do we have a negative in front of the f of x or inside attached to x? Well, it's minus 2, isn't it? Yeah, so we don't have negative f of x or f of negative x. We don't have either one of those, do we? No, so it wouldn't be a reflection. But we do notice the minus 2, yes, on the outside. So what would that match up with? It matches up with our vertical translation, yes? A number being subtracted from f of x. So this would be a vertical translation of what? 2 units. Because when we have a number added or subtracted outside, it's moving up or down. Up and down moves exactly as we would think it would. So if it's subtraction, it's moving down. If it's addition, it's moving up. Okay, well, that takes care of the first one. Now the other one is f of x minus 2. This would be horizontal. There's units. Two units right, 2 units to the right. Because inside parentheses, it's opposite of what we think. Since it's negative, it means it's moving to the right. Negative is going to be to the right, positive is going to be to the left. Because inside the parentheses, it's kind of opposite of what we think. It's going to move in the opposite direction of what we think. Questions on this here? Any questions on any of this here so far? So our first one is negative f of x. So what would this be? What would our translation be? Our transformation? Yes, I would agree. It's a reflection across the x-axis. And I know it's across the x-axis because the negative is outside. Since the negative's outside, it's across the x. Now the next one they gave us was f of negative x. And this would be a reflection across the y-axis because the negative is on the inside of the parentheses. Any questions on any of this here? We good with these here? Yes? Are we good to move on to the next string? Do we have this copied down? Yes? Okay. Well, before we move on, I want to throw another one at you. This isn't listed here, but what would negative f of negative x be? What would this be? So it'd be a reflection, because the negative outside is a reflection, the negative inside is a reflection, yes? Well, the negative outside, negative f, tells me it's a reflection across the x-axis, yes? Because the one outside tells me it's across the x. The one inside tells me it's across the y. There's nothing wrong with having both. We can have a reflection across the x and y axis. Well, that also means we can have a vertical, horizontal translation and a reflection across the x and y. We can have all four. We can have all of these. But any questions on these so far? Are we good with these here so far? Yes? Now that brings us to the last one that we have, vertical stretch. I would circle this here. Y equals a f of x. Y equals a f of x. So we have a vertical stretch slash shrink. Stretch and shrink. It could be one of these two. Now the main thing with this here is we're talking about a f of x. If a is greater than 1, it's a stretch of that value. If a is between 0 and 1, it's a shrink. Now the question comes up if a is negative. Well, that would be, if it's negative, it's the number in front of f of x, yes? If a is negative, it's a reflection across the x. When we talk about vertical stretch and shrink, we're just looking at the number. We're not caring about the sign. Because if it's negative, it's a reflection across the x. If it's positive, nothing happens. It's just a stretch or shrink. Questions on this here so far? So, is 2/3 greater than 1? 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 No, so that would be, under this here, it would be a shrink because it's less than 1. How about 5/4? Is 5/4 less than 1? Or is it greater than 1? It's greater than 1, isn't it? So this would be a stretch. So it's really saying, is it greater than 1 or less than 1? So when we look at this here, we have 3f of x. So we have a number being multiplied by f of x, yes? So we're most likely talking about a stretch or a shrink. Now what is the value? 3. So is 3 greater than 1? Or between 0 and 1? It's greater than 1, yes? So this here would be a vertical stretch of what? 3. If it's a shrink, we say vertical shrink of, and we give what the number is. Any questions on this here so far? Okay, let's look at 2f of x. Now, really, because the number is outside of f, it's not inside the parentheses, it's going to be a vertical stretch or shrink. So this here would be a vertical, why is it a stretch? Yeah, 2 is greater than 1, so this would be a vertical stretch of 2. This would be a vertical stretch of 2. And really what this is doing is it's increasing all the values by a factor of 2. It's really multiplying each of the y values, or multiplying each of them by a factor of 2. Now, because the number is being multiplied on the outside of f of x, it's going to be vertical. It's going to be vertical. It's a shrink because 1/4 is between 0 and 1. Be a vertical shrink of 1/4. And that is it. Any? This one here? So what would this be here? Of 1/2 because it's less than 1. Questions on this here? I think that's the end of the notes. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. And that's it.